Welcome to Atonement Confirmation, Lesson 10. Today's lesson is called Understanding Jesus' Work, King, talking about his work as King. In the past two lessons, we've seen Jesus' role as prophet and priest. Today, we're talking about his third office, his third role as King. To do that, we're going to turn to John chapter 10, verses 1 to 18, where we see Jesus' work as the Good Shepherd. Take a moment right now, turn to John chapter 10, and read verses 1 to 18. Pause the video while you do so. Number 1. What was a shepherd's job? A shepherd's job was to protect and guard the sheep. Maybe you're not too familiar with shepherds and sheep, especially if you've grown up in a big city. But that's what a shepherd does. He protects and guards the sheep. The sheep themselves are pretty much helpless. They don't have sharp claws. They don't have sharp teeth. They're not the smartest animals in the world. And so they need someone to protect them, to guard them from enemies like wolves or bears or lions. And that's what a shepherd does. Number 2. According to verses 4 and 5, how trusting are sheep of their shepherd? Sheep listen to their shepherd's voice and follow him wherever he goes. Again, if you're not that familiar with shepherds and sheep, maybe you don't know this, but sheep do listen to their shepherd's voice. When they hear him calling, they go to him. Number 3. What was an important part of a shepherd's job as he protected his sheep? Take a look at verse 12. An important part of his job was to fight off predators who were trying to hurt the sheep. He'd often use a staff to beat the predators away. Number 4. What did we need our shepherd Jesus to do for us? Take a look at verses 11 and 15. We needed our shepherd Jesus to die for us, to lay down his life for us. Number 5. What did Jesus mean when speaking to his Jewish disciples? He said that he had sheep that were not part of the current sheep pen. Look at verse 16. He meant that some people who were not Jewish would believe in Jesus. These people include us. Most of us do not come from Jewish heritage, and yet we are included because of faith in Jesus. He's called us. We've heard his voice and followed him. Number 6. A shepherd might lay down his life for the benefit of his sheep. As our shepherd, Jesus would lay down his life for us. What was unique about Jesus' work as our shepherd? Look at verse 18. Jesus would not stay dead. He would take up his life again. Number 7. God often referred to kings as shepherds of his people. Long before Jesus lived, God's people, the Israelites, had kings, and God referred to them as shepherds. Read Psalm 78, verses 70 to 72. Pause the video here to read it and answer this question. How is the work of a king similar to the work of a shepherd? A king guards and protects his people, like a shepherd does for sheep. We have a key term here, king. Now you can probably already define the word king, but here's the definition for you to write down. A person who's chosen to lead and protect a group of people. Number 8, we're going to read 3 passages here to answer this question. How did Jesus serve as our king during his earthly ministry, during his time on earth, from his birth until his death? So pause the video here and take a moment to read 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 56 and 57, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 9 and 10, and 1 John 3, verse 8b. That's the second half of that verse. In reading these verses, you see how Jesus serves as our king. When Jesus died and rose, he defeated our enemies, sin, death, and the devil. You can think of our salvation as a war between 2 kingdoms. By nature, we're born in sin, and that means we're born in the kingdom of the devil. He wants to rule over us and keep us in his kingdom so that we will die on earth and be spiritually and eternally dead forever, separated from God. But God did not want us to be separated from him. He wanted to bring us out of the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of the Son he loves. And so he sent Jesus to die and to rise, to defeat sin, and to defeat death, and to defeat the devil, to bring us into his glorious kingdom. And so we've seen how Jesus served as our king while he was here on earth. But now Jesus has ascended into heaven. Even so, he continues to be our king, to serve as our king. We're going to read Ephesians chapter 1, verses 18 to 23, and see how Jesus rules all things for us. You've read Ephesians chapter 1, verses 18 to 23. Number 9, what is the hope to which God has called us? Look at verse 18. That hope is the forgiveness of sins and eternal life in Jesus, because he has defeated our enemies, sin, death, and the devil. Number 10. How does Paul describe Jesus' position as king now, since his resurrection and ascension? Look at verses 20 and 21. He is now above every other power and authority. He is almighty. No one can defeat him. Number 11. Jesus served as our king during his earthly ministry by defeating our spiritual enemies. How does he continue to serve as our king today? Look at verses 22 and 23. He continues to rule and work all things for our eternal good. Those enemies he has defeated remain defeated, even so they continue to attack, and yet Jesus continues to defeat them. We have two passages to read here to answer this question. In the end, when will Jesus be clearly revealed as the King of all? Take a moment, read Matthew chapter 26, verses 62 to 64, and Revelation chapter 1, verse 7. Jesus will be clearly revealed as the King of all when he returns on the last day. Number 13. As King, what will Jesus do on that day? To answer this question, pause the video to read 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 51 and 52. On that day, Jesus will raise all people from the dead. We confess that in our creed, that he will raise all people, both believers and unbelievers. Number 14. What else will Jesus do on that day? To answer this question, read Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 to 46. On that day, Jesus will bring believers to heaven and send unbelievers to hell. This is what we confess in our creeds, that he will come to judge the living and the dead. Number 15, when will that day come? Read Matthew chapter 24, verse 36 to answer this question. Jesus tells us that we know neither the day nor the hour. No one knows except for God. We have a key term, Judgment Day. Judgment Day is a day coming at an unknown time when Jesus will return to bring believers to heaven and sentence unbelievers to hell. Number 16. After we're in heaven, what will Jesus do for us as our King? To answer this question, turn to Revelation 7, verses 16 and 17. When we are in heaven, Jesus will continue to always take care of us. Before we look at our lesson question for today, we have a few charts to look at, one on page 47. Here you see the difference between unbelievers and believers on the last day. Both unbelievers and believers will die unless Jesus comes back first. We die because of sin. In both cases, the body decays, but the place that the soul goes is different. The soul of the unbeliever goes to hell. The soul of the believer goes to heaven. When Jesus returns on the last day, the body of the unbeliever will be raised, and the soul of the unbeliever will be reunited with its body. Then both will be sent to an eternal torment of hell. burning in a great fire and cast out from God. Perhaps that's the worst part of the eternal torment of hell. Complete separation from God forever. Even now, unbelievers enjoy God's presence and provision. He sends the sun and the rain on them. He gives them food and drink and clothes. But in hell, they will have none of those things. The believer, on the other hand, when he or she is raised on the last day, their body will be raised and glorified, made new. All the problems that you had in your body on earth will be gone. They will be taken away. And the soul will be reunited with the body. Together, soul and body will enjoy the eternal joy of heaven, a rest from all labor, trouble, and sorrow, and pleasure with God and in glory. The next chart is on page 48, describing Christ's office. In the Old Testament, kings fought for people and ruled people. They also were anointed by God. Christ was anointed by God to be our king, and as our king, Christ has won the victory over sin, death, and the devil. He rules in our hearts, and he rules over all things. And so our lesson question for today. How does Jesus serve as our king? Jesus serves as our king by defeating all of our enemies when he died on the cross and rose from the dead. He rules all things for us now and eternally. That's our lesson for today on Jesus' work as king. For your homework, you have the worksheet on the website to fill out. Please fill out all the questions and don't forget to hit submit, as well as the memory work for next time. Thank you for joining me. We'll see you next time.